Okie dokie. Hi everyone. Welcome again to AuthorStory, the show where we do inspiring author interviews. I'm Alexander Lim, your host, and for this episode, I'm interviewing Laura Barnett, author of the novel The Versions of Us. And for those of you following along who are interested in romance and love stories, you can go over now to the Amazon link in the description below the video and check out or even get a copy of Laura's book. So Laura, welcome to AuthorStory. It's fantastic having you here with us as our guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, cool. So, Laura, please tell us about yourself and your story. What's your background?
Sure. So I'm in my early 30s and I'm based here in London in the UK, where it's currently what we say chucking it down, raining quite hard.
Okay.
I've written fiction really for as long as I can remember, ever since I was a child, and always had in mind that I wanted to become a novelist. It was always sort of novels that were the thing that really drove me as a reader and also as a writer. But like many people, I went to university and came out and felt that I wasn't quite ready. I didn't have enough life experience really to pour into a book.
Right.
And so I decided to train as a journalist and spent the last just over 10 years, about 11 years, as a journalist on national newspapers here in the UK and magazines. So I specialise in the arts, and I've been a features writer and theatre critic and general arts journalist for The Guardian newspaper and for The Telegraph, Time Out London, various magazines and publications. And that's been great, but I've been writing fiction the whole time. And finally, after about 10 years of really hard work and several novels in the bottom drawer, I have come up with my debut novel, The Versions of Us, which, to my absolute delight, has now been published or is about to be published in 26 different countries. So it's been quite a wild ride so far.
Right. Okay. So 10 years. That's quite a long time to produce a novel, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, yeah, I should say that wasn't 10 years working just on this book, but that was 10 years of sort of getting what I'd like to say, getting serious about writing. So, leaving university, training as a journalist and thinking, right, okay, I'm going to fit in fiction where I can around, this really quite demanding job in journalism. As I'm sure you know, Alexander, it's not an easy career. And so I wrote, The Versions of Us is actually the third novel I wrote. So I wrote two other novels through my 20s, each of which I had great hopes for and spent, all my mornings and afternoons and weekends when I should have been out doing fun things, kind of sitting doing that. And realised at the end of each one that they just weren't really working, got some feedback, they just weren't really on fire, they weren't sort of the best that I could do. So I would say The Versions of Us came out of quite a period of sort of soul searching for me, really. I turned 30. I'd got married, we'd bought a flat. It seemed like life was getting quite serious and friends were sort of settling into their careers, thinking about having families, deciding what they were going to do next. And I just felt, I'd always had this dream since I was so young to have a novel published, or primarily to write something I was proud of that people wanted to read and hopefully that would be published. And so I started to ask myself, what is that novel going to be? How am I going to capture people's attention? What have I been doing wrong with these other two books that just didn't go anywhere? Right. And I realised that I was making a subtle mistake. I think I'd written the other two books almost for an imagined reader. I think I'd thought, how can I please the reader? How can I write something the reader wants to read? Which is a logical way to start a book. But something shifted in my mind and I thought, hang on, that's not quite right, because you can never know what's going to please someone. You can't know what people want to read. You can't guess what the trends are going to be, unless you're writing a particular kind of genre fiction. You just can't write like that, and that's not me. So I realised that I needed to think differently and actually think about what I wanted to write above what other people wanted to read. It's a really, I'm sure you understand it as a fellow author, it's a really tricky and subtle distinction.
Right.
And things just seemed to fall into place once I realised that, because I thought, right, what do I really want to say? What do I want to read? And I woke up one morning, not long after that, thinking, okay, what I want to read is the story of one couple's relationship from beginning to end, told in 3 different ways across 60 years. So that was the book I went on to write.
Okay, cool. I got that, and that's very interesting. But Laura, for the benefit of our listeners who may not yet be aware of the concept behind the book, would you mind telling them about it?
Of course. So, The Versions of Us, as I say, it's a love story. In fact, it's 3 love stories. It traces the arc of one couple's relationship. There's 2 protagonists, Eva and Jim, who we first encounter in the late 1950s when they're students at Cambridge University. Eva is studying English and dreaming of becoming a writer,
Right.
and Jim is studying law but really longs to become a painter as his father was. So that's the initial scenario. And for one key moment in October 1958, when the couple either meet or don't meet in a particular sort of park area of Cambridge one afternoon,
Right.
we follow three separate trajectories of their lives, their relationships, both together and apart, across 60 years. So follow them from students in their teens through to adults in their late 70s, with all the vicissitudes of life in between, career highs and lows, children,
Right.
family illness, bereavement. So it's sort of about love as it's really lived across time and the pressures that life places on it, as well as the tiny twists of fate that take us down one path over another.
Okay, cool. I have to admit, it's I am intrigued by permutations, what ifs, parallel universe, and this is what I found really interesting about the novel. I mean, it's I don't recall any other novel being presented this way.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you like that. And it's interesting you say that because, as I mentioned, I had this idea, it came to me this morning about three years ago, this idea of telling the story in three different ways with the same characters. And it seemed so clear and crystalline in my head that I became convinced that I'd read this novel already.
Right.
And, in that terrible kind of fear you get where you don't want to accidentally plagiarize something. So you go away and sort of, I did loads of Google searching and double checking, and obviously I was aware of, say, a film like Sliding Doors, which obviously riffed on a similar kind of idea.
Right.
But I couldn't find a novel that had done it, and you're right, there isn't another novel that's done this. But the other scary thing, especially for a debut author, a new aspiring author, is that if no one's done it in centuries of human endeavour, then you sort of think, well, maybe it's impossible, and it did feel quite terrifying, really, to do it. So I had to put my hard hat on and just get on with it, really.
Right. Cool. I'm just curious. Did you ever watch the movie Sliding Doors?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is obviously an interesting parallel there in terms of
Because
parallel lives.
Yeah, because that's the sort of thing. That's a movie that kind of came in mind when I was checking the book out. I mean, that's the only other thing that I can think of with a concept similar to your novel.
Yes, there's that, and there's also a novel by Lionel Shriver called The Post-Birthday World, which I haven't actually read it, but I believe it spins out from a woman's decision whether to have an affair or not, and then we follow two versions. So, and obviously we have Kate Atkinson's Life After Life, which, while very different because it's more about sort of reincarnation, that does follow different versions of the same event. So, again, that came out sort of after I'd finished the first draft of this. But so there's something in the ether, I think. I think we are all intrigued, aren't we, by this idea of what might have been. I mean, it's this perennial question about the road not travelled, to paraphrase Robert Frost. It's this fascination with how things might have turned out if we'd only turned that corner rather than that one. And I guess I was particularly interested in how that would affect romantic relationships and also relationships of all kinds with our family and friends, and indeed with ourselves. I really wanted to follow, these three different, quite similar iterations through all these tiny different permutations across time.
Right. Okay. Well, that's definitely interesting there. What made you decide to write it out this way? I mean, you could have just written just one straight out story. What made you decide to write out three different versions of a story?
You mean, so why did I sort of decide to plait them together, or why did I not just write one story in the first place?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Well, the whole concept was sort of bundled together. It wasn't a project I could do without doing it three ways, if you see what I mean. I mean, I thought, could I do this two way? If I just did it one way, that would just be a regular love story, and that wasn't
right. Okay.
That wasn't my intention. My intention was to play with this idea, not only of structure, novelistic structure, and what the reader could experience in terms of what the potential of fiction was to describe three different stories in one book, but also how that would affect the characters. So it had to be multiple stories from the beginning, and then it was a case of how many there would be, and I thought about doing two, which is what Sliding Doors does, and that didn't seem interesting or challenging enough for fiction. And I thought four would be too many, so I settled on three.
Okay, all right. Well, it definitely works.
Thank you.
Okay, so as you mentioned before, the concept of the book is not a common one. I mean, did you ever have any doubts while you were like writing it out or getting it published? Thinking something along the lines of, "Oh my gosh, this ain't gonna fly," or "What the heck am I doing?" Because the concept is really radical.
Of course I did.
Mm.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I don't know any writers who don't have that little voice in our heads pretty much every day saying, what the hell are you doing? Why are you trying to
Okay.
do this? So yes, very much so. I mean, that voice was there from the beginning, and it was a real effort to try and quieten that voice. I go running, so I find that's quite helpful. It's sort of, I think the endorphins help build confidence. So I did quite a lot of physical exercise to kind of push through and give myself the belief that I could do it. And then I stopped when I was about halfway through the first draft, and I felt it was working. In my gut, I felt it was working. But I thought, right, I need to show this to someone now, someone I can trust, and see whether they can follow it, whether they're completely
Right.
confused. So I asked not a close friend, but a sort of colleague, another writer who I'd met a few weeks before, and asked him if he would read it, and kindly he did. And I waited with bated breath to hear what he saw, and thanks to him, he came back saying that he loved it, he could follow it, he was desperate to read the rest, and that was just a sort of sigh of relief. Okay, right, I think this is going to work. But yeah, of course, there have been doubts all the way along, and I'm aware that it is a structurally challenging book. That excites me as a reader, and it excites me as an author. So I hope it excites other people. But I am aware, it's not your average story. It is one that requires the reader to work quite hard. But I think people who enjoy fiction that's kind of closer to real life, that shows love as it really is, will
Yeah.
enjoy it. And I think hopefully, I've put a lot of handholds in for the reader. So there's lots of, for instance, there are several scenes that replay through each version of the story
Mm.
consecutively throughout. And I thought of those as sort of, as I say, handholds on the cliff face, so that anyone who was confused could suddenly kind of get together and understand what was happening. And that seems to be something that readers have really responded to.
Okay, cool, nice. Laura, I must admit, I dabble with some essays and short stories every now and then, and there are times even with only one version of a story, I find it somewhat difficult to keep tabs on all that goes on. But
Sure.
you wrote out three different versions, which are, essentially three different stories, and each one is like the length of a novel in itself. How challenging was it to write out those three different versions?
I won't lie to you, it was very challenging. It was challenging. But at the same time, so I mean, people often ask, did I have a massive spreadsheet or a sort of Rain Man style wall covered in post-it notes? And
Right,
the
right.
answer to both of those questions is no. I mean, I did develop a spreadsheet through the editing process just to absolutely check that all the dates were watertight and everything fitted together. But with the first draft, I wrote sort of three short paragraphs, one for each version of the story, describing roughly what would happen. And
Okay.
I wrote some sort of character descriptions of Eva and Jim, the two protagonists, to get a sense of who they were and how their lives might sort of carry them. But otherwise, it was a case of sort of living with the characters, inhabiting them, I guess, for want of a better word, and then moving with them through time. I can't really describe it any other way. It felt very natural and organic, and it was difficult. And there were times when I had to start keeping Word documents with relevant dates and names, and especially when the children came along. But I wouldn't say I got confused. It felt very, very natural to me, very clear in my mind.
Okay, okay. Well, that's definitely important. You wouldn't have been able to write out three different versions if you weren't clear on those things.
Absolutely.
Right, cool. So, the time span of the book's a long one, from, as you mentioned, 60 years. And,
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, stuff that's around like in the 1960s is probably not commonplace in 2012.
No.
How much research did you need to do to, flesh out the different time periods through which a story took place?
I did a lot of research, but it's interesting. I did most of it sort of as I was writing. I didn't spend sort of 6 months sequestered in a library, reading absolutely everything I could on each decade. I mean, as I was writing, I immersed myself in novels, films, TV shows, music of each period as I was moving along.
Right?
And then when I came to a scene that was, the internet is the most wonderful resource for writers now. I mean, I think people almost poo-poo it like it's too easy, but it really is incredible. I mean, you've got the Getty Images archive with incredible film footage, photographs of, you know, specific places and times and events. And as a former journalist, well, I mean, I still do some journalism. As a journalist, I am obsessed with realism, with getting things right. In fact, I find it quite difficult to let myself make things up. So a lot of times, you know, there are scenes set in New York in 1962, and it was so important to me that that I had, you know, very clear images of exactly what Washington Square looked like in that year, in that era, even what the weather was like. You know, I did an awful lot of background research, sort of scene by scene. And then I think it was important just to remember that research is vital and you need the detail in there, but ultimately it's the story that matters the most. So I think you could go away and spend, you know, 5 years researching every single aspect of some particular decade or place, but then I think you might lose something from the story, because it's not about you showing off about how much you know. It's about taking these characters through their natural decisions and their natural sort of outcomes. But yeah, you're right. There was a lot of research, and it was mainly fiction, you know, looking at art, a lot of resources online. Pinterest is brilliant, and Twitter and Instagram. So I have a big archive of material that I sort of brought together.
Wow. Okay. So I'm just curious, how much is this archive of yours? How big is this thing? Is this like, you know, 2 big binder folders, 3, a small library?
It's digital. So I write using a program called Scrivener. I don't know if you've come across it, but it's brilliant. And within that, you can basically create a sort of virtual ring binder. So I did that, and I borrowed a technique that Hilary Mantel, you know, the amazing author of all the Wolf Hall novels, uses. I saw her interviewed on the television, and she has a physical like filing cabinet. Wow. With drawers. Each drawer is labelled like A through to Z, so through the whole alphabet. And every time she comes across something, you know, from the Tudor period, like say Henry VIII's doublet or pantyhose or something, she puts that in this particular drawer so that she can refer to it when she needs it. Okay. And I thought that was such an amazing idea that I now do that for everything I write. So I have folders in this program on my computer labelled A to Z, and every time I come across something, you know, from the colour of the sunset over New York Harbour in 1962 you know, something in Sussex in the 1990s, I put it in the relevant place, and then when I need it, it's there, and I find that really useful. It's a sort of foundation to build on. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, with a novel, I mean, it's the small details that, you know, really that can really sell a scene or a conversation or something like that. Exactly. It's so interesting, isn't it? Isn't it a funny paradox with fiction that the more specific and personal you make it, the more general and sort of worldly it becomes. It's a really weird thing. You have to zone in on the really small things in order to make readers feel that they're there, I guess, that they're living with the characters. Right. True. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the characters. Can you just describe to our listeners who Eva and Jim are, basically? Of course. So, as I mentioned, Eva and Jim are our 2 protagonists, and when we meet them, they're studying at Cambridge. Eva is studying at one of the 2 women's colleges that were the only option for women to study in the late 1950s. She's studying English and dreaming of becoming a writer. She's grown up with in a Jewish family in North London. Her parents are both Austrian, and they fled Vienna separately in the late 1930s for kind of obvious reasons, and met on a train to London, and, you know, married later. So she's actually never known her real father. Her mother had had a relationship with a guy in Vienna that ended. So that's her background, a sort of arty, quite musical background in North London. And Jim, by contrast, has grown up in an area called Sussex, which is a rural part of southern England. And his mother, Vivian, is a very troubled, difficult character. She struggles with mental health issues. I never name them in the novel, partly because I suspect that they probably wouldn't have been named in the way that we now understand such a condition through those years when there was much less understanding. She's probably bipolar, that's what she would be called now, and she has very wild mood swings and is very demanding of Jim's time and energy, and he finds caring for her difficult. His father died when he was 10, so he sort of feels responsible for her. And his father has cast a long shadow over Jim's life. He was a famous and successful painter who was also rather unfaithful and tricky character. So they're both living, coming from very different places, but they meet, and we see them grow through the novel in different ways, each of them pursuing their careers to sort of various ends, succeeding, not succeeding. So there's a lot in the novel about how a creative couple can support each other, how one person's success can come at the detriment of the others, and because of the era that we cross, so the second half of the 20th century, when the position of women changed leaps and bounds, at least in Western society, we see Eva bearing the brunt of that. So she succeeds very, very, very much as a writer in the first version, and that's something that Jim just really finds difficult to deal with. So there's a lot in there about gender dynamics as well. It's something that I'm hugely interested in and wanted to explore.
Okay, got that. The thing I found interesting about Eva and Jim was that, through all of these three versions, for me, they seemed really believable. I mean, consistent. Their reactions, their characters, their personalities, it's consistent, as they go through the three versions of their story. Did you base these characters on anyone in particular? Or did you just kind of put them together?
Exactly. No, I didn't base them on anyone, and I think it's important really that I had written two other novels, that will never see the light of day before I wrote this one, because I think everyone says everybody's first novel is about themselves, and I think I kind of got that out of my system with the other two. So these really are. It was the first time I think that I'd created fictional characters that really, really felt like real people to me, and it's a kind of weird madness. Like you start, talking to imagining people in your head, and even now I can sort of picture sitting and having a conversation with Eva, and I know exactly what she'd say, what she'd be. But that said, Eva's family and her Jewish background and the journey that her family have made from Vienna, that is based on my own family situation, my step family, in fact. I had a wonderful step-grandmother. She passed away really just a few months before I started writing the novel, so I guess it's natural that she came out in it in some ways. She was called Anita Bild, and she was born in Vienna, and like Eva's parents, had to flee after the Anschluss, the Nazi occupation, and came over to England and made a life here. And I got to know her in my sort of mid to late teens, and she was a huge supporter of my writing and just a really formative character for me. So I guess again it's natural that she came out in some way in the book.
Okay. All right. Cool. Got that. Cool. So the book's been a big success in the United Kingdom. Am I correct? I mean, like for it to be a Sunday Times bestseller.
Yeah, it's been really thrilling. It's done really well here, and yeah.
Yeah, and I also read that it's like being published in you mentioned this. It's been translated. It's published in over 20 different countries. And
yes, I think it's 26 now, yeah.
Oh, 26. Okay, well, there's success right there. What do you think is the secret behind the book's widespread success? I mean, it's not just popular in the United Kingdom, it's also popular in 26 different countries.
Yeah, gosh, I think it's really hard for the author to account for that. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed, really. But I guess the feedback I get from people, and it's just come out in Spain and Italy, and it's been out in Germany for a little while, in France, it's been nominated for a prize there, and I have people kind of contacting me on Twitter from New Zealand and South Africa and India, and the thing that people seem intrigued by is this idea of what if, the path not travelled, which is something that all of us, no matter where we're from, what gender we are, what sexual orientation, what nationality, we all wonder this, and it seems to speak to people in that way. And I guess I go back to what I told you at the start, which is by writing something that I guess really meant something very true and deep to me, it seems to have connected with others, and that's something that I'm unbelievably grateful for, and that's something that I will keep trying to do as a writer, keep trying to dig deeply and challenge myself, and not just kind of go for the obvious easy option.
Right. Okay, cool. I have to ask this. Did you ever think the versions of us would ever get to be successful as it presently is?
How do you mean?
Like whether you were like writing the book, or we were publishing it, or at some time before it actually came out in the market, did you ever think that it would get to be this successful?
No, I
Okay.
didn't. I didn't allow myself to. I mean, you dream. Everyone dreams.
All right.
But I'm aware of how difficult it is to succeed in the marketplace. There's so much wonderful fiction, and it's a, shrinking, difficult market. So I didn't really let myself get too excited. But I have to say, it was a sort of domino effect because, I mean, I was excited about the book when I wrote it. And then, then it was a matter of finding an agent. And then I found an agent. She was excited about it. That wasn't easy. I had to approach a number of people before finding the right one.
Right.
And then, there was an auction over here, and there was a preemptive offer from Houghton, my publishers in the US, and there started to be offers from other nations around the world. And that's when you sit up and think, okay, right, something exciting is happening here. And my agent cautiously said, this could be big, this could be, but even then, you just don't know. Like, nothing's guaranteed. So
True.
I've just tried to work really hard and keep my feet on the ground and just be aware that I can enjoy the success while it's here, but all that really matters in the end is the words on the page.
Right. Well, okay, cool, fantastic. And we know that it worked out well, definitely.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been a gamble, and I'm glad I made it.
All right, cool. So, Laura, is there anything else, like other stories or topics that you may want to explore as an author in the future? And this is not necessarily like fiction; could be nonfiction stuff.
Sure. Well, I'm actually I'm editing the sort of first draft of my next book, so I can tell you a bit about that.
All right, go ahead, please.
So yeah, my next novel, it's called Greatest Hits, and it focuses in on music, on the life of a musician. Music is something, it's probably my second greatest passion after literature. I used to be in a band. I sing a little. I play piano. I'm always surrounded by music. My husband is a musician. So when I'm writing, actually, you asked about how I get into a particular period, and I do hear music in my head kind of when I'm writing in a particular era. And there's a lot of music in the versions of us. You can actually check out my Spotify playlists on my website. There's some links there to playlists I put together. So Greatest Hits, anyway, is about a woman in her 60s, a British singer-songwriter, sort of in the Joni Mitchell mould, kind of somewhere between Joni Mitchell and Kate Bush, who's been very successful, but has had some really tricky stuff to deal with and has retired from music about 10 years before. And the novel is set over one day in spring 2015 when she's in her home studio, listening to her back catalogue for the first time in a decade, choosing songs for a Greatest Hits album. So the book takes the form of a sort of Greatest Hits album. Each track that she plays becomes a chapter about how and when it was written, and we follow her life from birth to now. So again, across about 60 years. So in that way, I guess it parallels versions of us, but otherwise it's a very different beast, and I'm really enjoying it. The other really exciting thing is I'm working with a singer-songwriter to actually create a soundtrack, an actual album that will be available to buy separately to the novel, which is really exciting because that's kind of about crossing platforms, crossing from literature to music and back again, and it's a really challenging and exciting process.
Wow, it definitely sounds pretty involving.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Laura, in this last minute or so, are there any words of wisdom you'd like to share to inspire our listeners?
Sure. I would say if anyone out there is writing or trying to write, I would really say don't give up, because here I am in my early 30s and I've wanted to do this since I was 5, so that's a whole lot of work along the way. And dig deeply, ask yourself really hard questions about what you want to say, and then challenge yourself. Take risks with structure. Don't just replicate what other people have done.
Right.
My husband, I say he's a musician, he's a big fan of Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters, and he has this quote from Dave Grohl above his desk which says, don't follow in the footsteps of the masters, seek what they sought, which I love. He's going to be cross that I borrowed that, but hey. And the idea is, don't just do what other people have done, but kind of go after the truth that they were looking for. Find your own truth, find your own way. Right. I've just done a yoga class. I'm getting a bit philosophical, but
okay.
But I think it is really important to dig deep and to ask big questions and really find your own way of expressing them, and you'll get there. Just keep believing.
All right, cool. So listeners, pay heed. That's coming from the voice of experience right there. So in closing, the book is The Versions of Us. The author is our guest, Laura Barnett, and you can find her book at her website. So, Laura, thank you very much for your time and for being on Author Story. It was a very interesting session, a different kind of novel, and given how successful it is, I have a feeling that your name is soon going to become a household name.
Oh, that's really kind, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Of course, for those of you listening, there's always her book to read, and you can get to it right now by going to the Amazon link in the video description below. And of course, if you'd like to follow our author interviews on YouTube, just click on the subscribe button. So that's all, folks. So long for now, everyone, and I'll be back on Author Story with another inspiring author.